Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's weekly wrap. It's the 22nd of May, 2026. Mirko joins me on the screen, and I believe Anthony was trying to, but he's having a few problems with IT. So we're going to leave him alone. Mirko, how are you,
Look,
buddy?
I'm well. I'm well. I wouldn't be surprised if Anthony pops up on the screen, but that's all right. One thing we do here is we just go live. There's no scripting here, and we just work it out as we go.
Mate, I'm loving live, and I'm feeling a bit like the Labor Party at the moment. They are having the week from hell, aren't they, buddy?
Yeah, no, they're not having much fun. I even sent you to Canberra this week to try and sort out what is going on up there. Did you have any luck, mate?
No, mate. Look, I was looking for Anthony and Jim under rocks, and I couldn't find him. But then I was talking to a cabbie as I was going back to the airport, and I was telling him about my pains of not being able to find them. He said, "Oh, that's because they're in someone's pocket," which I thought was very funny.
That does seem to be the consensus that everyone feels like they've got a hand in their pocket at the moment. But yeah,
Well,
I'm not surprised, and I'm sure we're going to talk about the backlash that continues, the fallout from the budget night from
absolutely,
there.
mate.
And look, it's certainly affected markets, and look, confidence is a little bit shaky in Australia at the moment, and when I do look at the markets, I mean, if it I don't normally quote daily numbers, but interesting sort of set of numbers. If I look at Monday, we were off 1.5%. Tuesday, we're up 1.08. Wednesday, down 1.2. Thursday, up 1.4. Looks like we're going to have an update today, but it just shows you the sort of the level of
Mm.
changes that we've actually had, and after all of that, we're down 0.29 for the first 4 days of trading. So I'd like to think we finished slightly in the green, and in the US, it's been a very similar story. We've seen it the first 2 days of red, then picked up off the back of the Iran US so-called talks, where I think President Trump said that he's going to defer bombing them into oblivion, or whatever it was that he said last, and that the talks will continue. So the market took that as a glimmer of hope on that front. So the back end of the week has actually been pretty good in the US. So they finished the week, the S&P 500's up 0.5, and Nasdaq is up about 0.28 for the week, but sort of plenty going on that front, and of course Nvidia reported this week too. Everyone was sort of waiting to see what they would come out with.
Yeah, no, look, it's been a fascinating week, but the market feels a little bit directionless in truth. So you've got all these issues, and people just don't know where to look. So you've got the issues going on with obviously with Iran, and you've got the issues going on in terms of here in Australia, and then all of a sudden you've got Nvidia, which comes out with a cracking report, as we've all seen from that point of view. So it is a tough market to invest in at the moment, that's for sure.
And I mean, Nvidia's numbers came through, and they were super solid, and I think they came out and reported revenue for the quarter of $81 billion for the quarter, which was above the expectations of 78 billion. And they still pulled back about 4% during the course of the week. Not to worry, Nvidia investors, because they've still had a pretty good year, pretty good 3 years, pretty good 5 years, just quietly. But I mean, they've grown so much, and you think about where they're at. The last number that I picked up was that they are 8.5% of the S&P 500.
Yeah.
Just that stock alone. And in fact, you want to stretch that a little bit further, the MSCI, the World Index, which pretty much takes into account the entire globe of equity markets, 5.4%
Wow.
of
Wow.
a single stock. So if you thought we had market concentration in Australia, this one's another level.
Well, how about this? Like they've even gone to the AI boom, had a look at it and said, yeah, we don't like anything here. We're just going to buy our own stock back
Yeah,
up
yeah,
to 80 billion. It's
they're
just nuts.
incredible, and they've turned themselves into, both supplier, investor, you name it. They're on every side of the transaction in this AI boom. So, look, they keep hitting their numbers. So, despite what people have said, they continue to go from strength to strength.
Yeah. Anthony, welcome, my friend. Better late than never.
Oh, we
Oh,
still
we
don't
still
have
we,
a
we still don't have
microphone.
volume. Oh, you poor bugger. That's all right, mate. Well, you can sit and listen to the conversation. Don't stress. But look, Okay, if we now go back to Australia here, we had the budget, and last week you had Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese walking around like Cheshire cats, thinking they were real clever in terms of the strategy. And I think on Wednesday when we did our budget presentation, we were very, I wouldn't say cautious, but we towed the line and we said, well, okay, let's just report on the facts. Let's just report on what we know. And then by Thursday, Friday, you got to see a bit more information. It was starting to come out. And I think on Friday in last week's weekly wrap, we were pretty quick to go, hang on a sec, this budget seems a bit warped. It seems to be an attack on capital. They haven't done anything on the income side. The government needs to be careful here because there's a touch of hubris and a touch of mixed messaging. 1 week later, looks like what we were talking about last week has come to roost big time, eh?
100%, and this backlash is massive. I mean, we spoke to some tax partners yesterday, and we just talk about the massive fallout that this has and the ramifications. And I think for me, I've always sort of said it's the longer term structural stuff that concerns me the most, and I do genuinely believe, despite the fact that there's been some really funny memes pop up this week. But I actually do genuinely believe that this is a real sort of blow, sledgehammer blow for things like entrepreneurship and people wanting to invest and really take on, risk and the like in the economy. And, just little snippets of things that have occurred as a result. So remember, this was all designed to sort out this inequality that we keep talking about, to get younger people into homes and the like. One of the unintended consequences, I think it was Macquarie Bank already this week, wrote to all of their broker network, and Macquarie's a big player in home loans, and said, we're releasing a new calculator because we now need to account for the fact that negative gearing is no longer in many instances, and saying to the broker network, just be aware that, we're going to be knocking deals back. And, there's been some numbers done on that. I think there was something to the effect of single person on $100,000, where they can't take into the negative gearing benefits now of an investment property. Their borrowing capacity reduces by 150 grand.
Well,
that was not an intended consequence of this deal. So certainly some stuff going on, and I caught this morning. I don't know how much there is in this, but talk that there might be actually a walk back on the testamentary trusts.
Yeah.
I think that the government has come up with this policy on the run, and now are sort of saying, hang on, this could cost us an election. Remember, always back self-interest.
Yeah. Look, one of the things that there's probably a couple of things here in the sense that there was a touch of hubris, I think. When your majority is so large and you start to believe your own BS, you start to think that you're cleverer than everybody else. And there's two parts to it. The Australian electorate aren't mugs. So we do value trust and we do value what people say. And the reality is they went to an election and said, well, none of this is going to change. They've then gone after the result and said, well, okay, we're going to change everything anyway. Now, one thing I've got to give them credit for, I don't disagree with what the government's trying to do in terms of the theory behind it. So I don't disagree with the fact that capital, in terms of the exclusions and the way it was working out for capital, it was more favourable on that side, and the younger generation were covering that cost. So that I'm okay with, and I do agree with the argument. Do I think the housing system is broken? Absolutely. But, here we had a budget that talked about intergenerational inequity. Here we had a budget talked about housing and the aspiration of all that. Yet a week after the budget, or a week and a half, we haven't spoken about housing at all. The focus has purely and simply been on tax. So they've got the messaging wrong. Now, one thing I do know about politics is when you screw up the messaging and when you get it wrong and the media turns and the memes turn against you and social media has transformed this as well. Because previously it would take a slow burn. This has been a week of sheer fun. This thing here is once it turns, and then you've got government making policy on the run and rolling things back, and in media interviews, you're in for an absolute chaos in terms of a show at the moment. So, look, I don't know how the government wins this. I think they're in a lot of trouble, and the Liberal Party must be sitting there rubbing their hands, going, "We've gone from complete irrelevancy to all of a sudden actually now having something to talk about." My only hope for the likes of Angus Taylor is get your head out of the gutter and focus on the economy. Stop all the rubbish about all the other stuff Just focus on the economy because that's where Australians want you to be at this moment in time. Crazy stuff, man. Now, unemployment. Good news on the not good news, but good news on the inflation front and maybe interest rates.
Yeah, look, unemployment ticked up 0.2% to 4.5% in Australia. And I think something that we've been talking about for quite some time now is that, the economy is not in such great shape. And this, regardless of what people are saying, that if you actually do get out in the real world and talk to real people across, a variety of industries, it's not all roses out there. And I think what we've seen now is with the unemployment sort of tick up a little bit, people are starting to feel the pinch, of inflation, starting to feel the pinch of particularly the oil price in households and the like. And so now the talk is, will we get a reprieve in June? I think that the RBA will, off the back of that data with the unemployment, may just pause and let's just see what happens. And all of a sudden the odds are changing that we will have 3 more rate rises. We may not end up with any, but I suspect that if this issue in the Middle East continues and oil price stays at where it is, we probably will end up with an extra rate rise because remember they're trying to smash inflation.
Yeah, I'll probably take a different view. I think the unemployment number is exactly where the RBA wants it to be. Or sorry, the trajectory is where the RBA wants it to be, and that'll be the lever for them to say, okay, some of the heat is coming out, and I do think that might result in a pause. So I think from that point of view, you can just what's occurring in Iran and all that kind of stuff. And I understand the inflationary impacts and all that kind of stuff, but you can't blame the consumer for that. The other thing I think that also needs to happen here is this whole week has been focusing on the revenue piece of what the government is doing, the tax take. And I think it was Chris Mims, the New South Wales Premier, who spoke about, you go to work for 2.5 days a week, where you work for yourself, and the other 2.5 days you're working for the government. That's a really terrible message when one of your own is sending it. So that kind of tells you where that one sits. But we haven't spoken about spending at all. So this government really needs to have a relook at its spending and go, well, hang on a sec, that's the other way we can bring inflation down, because that seems to be going and no one seems to be questioning all that sort of rubbish. Now, one thing, okay, and I noticed this week, EY, one of the big four, in terms of their policies and so on, and organisations tend to look at what EYs are doing and all that kind of stuff because they set the standards. EY are making people pay back maternity leave if they leave before 12 months. That's a change.
That's a very interesting concept, and I mean, you when you think about it from an employer's point of view, I mean, some of these employers are super generous with their mat leave. Some of them offer 12 months of paid maternity leave and the like, and quite often some people actually take advantage of that and maybe not even show up again after the 12-month period, right? And that cost is borne by the employer. So, but it's an interesting one for them to someone's got to go first on this and to sort of say, there's a clawback after of a couple of months of, so I think in their case they offer 6 months of full paid maternity leave, and they're saying if you leave within 12 months of returning, we will claw back 2 months of the 6 that we paid you. Look, I'm not surprised, and I think that you might find that more employers actually are doing this. It's a bit like education, in specialized industries like ours where you need to attain qualifications to be able to provide advice and the like. It's a big impost for employers, and quite often people will pick up their educations and walk out the door and say thanks very much, and the employer's left to carry the can. So it's not uncommon to have the clawbacks in contracts for things like that. So I'm not surprised that it's sort of stretching out now to sort of maternity leave as well.
Yeah, and look, like all things, Mirko, the pendulum swings. Yeah, so clearly, when we went down this path, it was very much it moved from an employer market to an employee market. The pendulum had swung, so employers were adjusting policies on the run, accommodating and so on. We've had a couple of years of it. They've got to see what it looks like, and they've gone, yeah, we don't like this, and maybe that pendulum is now swinging back. Now, hopefully, it doesn't swing back too far to the employer side. Hopefully, it lands somewhere in the middle, where it is a fair approach in terms of trying to do that from that end. Now, can we, I guess from that point of view, if we think about the Trump issue at this particular moment, I just want to raise something that happened during the week, which there are times in your life where you just shake your head and you go, surely to God, we haven't gone there. But this is a grift that I don't think I've ever seen in my life. So Trump sued his own government or his own tax office for having released two tax returns. The two tax returns that he released meant that he paid $750 in tax in 2016 and $750 in tax in 2017. That's it. All right. Now, he's gone and sued his department for $10 billion. They've negotiated a deal now where he won't take the $10 billion. Now, mind you, he appointed the department that he was suing, so he was never going to lose. And the Department of Justice, which has now become the Department of Trump, they were prosecuting the case for him. So this is just it's mind-blowing in terms of its stupidity. In saying that, they've agreed to give him a $1.7 billion kitty or war chest, which he can now hand out to whoever he wants to hand out to with no oversight. That's a first point. And the second one, which I think is just extraordinary, he's received immunity, him, his family, and all his companies from tax and tax audits forever and a day. Tell me this isn't normal.
I'm trying to process what you've just said there, Luke, and you couldn't. I think it comes back to you could not make this stuff up if you actually tried. And what he's managed to do with I'm going to drop the case, and he's created this slush fund, and that's 1.76 billion US dollars. Yeah, so what's that? 2.5 billion Aussie dollars, and and basically what it is it sort of pretty much gives him immunity and all his entities and all the rest of it. But all of his mates and anybody that they can argue was sort of politically targeted by the previous administration, they're now entitled to a compensation scheme as a result. And this money can just be dished out to anybody they like.
I sat there and like the other day they were interviewing Todd Blanche, who's the Attorney General who replaced Pam Bondi, and you thought if Pam was bad and then this idiot comes along, you think, oh my God, we just got clown versus clown. So he's come up now and he's trying to justify this, and the senators are asking him all these questions, and he said, but I am the Attorney General, and it's just like no, you are the Attorney General, yeah, sure, but you're also Trump's lawyer. It's just the level of grift and the fact that the media isn't absolutely outraged. Mind you, when the very people who are going to receive part of the 1.7 billion are the media, it's pretty hard to argue, I suppose, eh?
I just shake my head, and is nothing not possible? The answer is no. Everything is possible in this crazy world we live in at the moment.
Look, all it reminds me is luckily we won the lottery of life and we live in Australia and not in some stupid country where clearly democracy has gone out the window and stupidity has overtaken common sense. And look, there will come a day where they'll get voted out, and there will come a day when all this thing falls apart. I just hope they don't break the foundations of it, because at the moment what they're doing is just sheer lunacy and theft. There's no other way to describe it.
We are giving it a nudge. We don't want to be left behind here in Australia. We are, our politicians are giving it a bit of a nudge as well on this front.
Now, Mirko, I know you're a fan of Shakespeare, and so am I, because you and I both went to school and we both studied Romeo and Juliet, and we were all pretty cool on that. Do you remember that? Do you remember the play Much Ado About Nothing? So it was a play where you had four central characters. It was all trickery and teasing each other, trying to extract a relationship from one another. It was a very clever play, and you could see why Shakespeare was such a wonderful writer back in the day. Now, we had the Beijing talks last week, and you had Xi running around. Well, actually, Xi wasn't running around. Xi was pretty standing there stoically. And you had Trump being a clown through that whole process. And then obviously his responses thereafter about Xi saying that he had the hottest economy in the world and that he was the greatest president and God knows whatever else he was making up. But nothing spoken about tariffs, nothing spoken about Iran, nothing spoken about Taiwan. That seemed like a real nothing situation, I would have thought. A bit like the Shakespearean play.
Yeah, no, much ado about nothing sounds very much that trip. I mean, Trump could have just posted photos of him doing sightseeing and walking the Great Wall of China or something, because nothing came out of that at all.
Yeah. Look, I shake my head in bemusement going, what on earth is going on? And the fact is, he just gets away with whatever he wants to. And look, I know that every time I open my mouth and I speak, I'm just putting another nail in the coffin. I won't be going to the US anytime soon. And that's okay. That's okay. But Jesus, I'm just looking at this stuff going, when does this end?
No, this nightmare's still got a few years to run, mate.
Fair point. Fair point. All right, buddy. Well, we've lost Anthony because clearly his technology wasn't working.
I noticed he was online listening to what we were saying, just sort of saying, "Do I need to call the lawyers?" He's always a bit nervous about us.
He did turn around and goes, "Mate, I'll in America." So that's one thing I will agree with. So from that point of view, now, mate, I think the weekend's coming up. What have you got planned? Anything exciting?
Pretty quiet for me this weekend, which I'm kind of looking forward to. I haven't looked at the weather forecast yet. What are we looking at?
I've got no idea. I'm just having a quick glance now. I didn't. I've got no idea. Actually, I wasn't paying attention to it. So it's telling me. I think tomorrow tomorrow shouldn't be too bad. 17 and 17. So we're back to the clouds.
Consistent.
So I think
consistent.
That London grey is coming back into Melbourne, and I think on Sunday they're talking about a 60% chance of rain. So could be one of those weekends. Sit back, turn on the heaters, grab a good book, disconnect from your Wi-Fi's and all that kind of stuff, because the world's gone stupid. There's no point talking about that. And maybe contemplate capital gains and how that's going to impact you, I dare say.
Look, who knows where we'll land next week when we start talking about actually these tax changes. And I will be very interested to see if the Labor Party actually start doing a bit of backpedaling here and making some tweaks. That won't actually be a good look for them.
I reckon they will, mate. I reckon they will. And I think the other thing that they'll also do is next week they do come back for the last week of the winter sittings. And I think they were hoping to ram through these changes. I reckon these changes are getting a fairly big amendment over the weekend because, I don't think Australians are happy. And I think the memes have definitely won in terms of changing the message and in fairness and in defence to the government too. There's a fair degree of there's a high degree of misinformation as well. So there's a lot of stories out there where you sit back and go, well, that's just not true. And for a lot of people who are currently in the world, these things are grandfathered. So we're not actually impacted by a lot of this stuff. It's really, we're trying to help the younger generation, yet they're the ones who are impacted the most by these changes, which seems somewhat bizarre.
My favourite meme of the week, though, was I think it appeared on LinkedIn, and it was a young lady who was clearly a business owner, and AI, they had actually planted Prime Minister Albanese right next to her, and the headline wrote, "I'd like to thank Prime Minister Albanese for taking a 47% stake in my business. So kind of you." I thought it's very, very funny.
Look! It was I got into the cab on Wednesday when I got into Canberra, and this grumpy cabbie, we just sat there and he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I told him what I did. He said, "Oh, you've come to see Albanese and Chalmers, have you?" And I said, "Well, no, I've come to see somebody else, but I wouldn't mind running into him." The expletives that came out of his mouth in relation to them threatening him and wanting to take his crypto was extraordinary. So I think they've got a bit of work to do.
The cabbies are always a good gauge of what's going on in the economy. The rule of thumb: if the cabbie starts talking to you about the share market, we're in a bubble. Crypto, same. And if he's not happy about the government, it's game on.
Absolutely. All right, mate. Well, look, thank you for joining me today. To all our wonderful team out there who do all this wonderful work for us week to week, thank you as well. And to our lovely clients, have a cracking weekend. Enjoy. Disconnect as best as you can. I think it's going to be a bit grey, so sit back, grab a good book, nice glass of wine, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll chat soon. See you next week. Cheers, guys.
See you guys.